But no, welcome. That was amazing. That was incredible. Pastor B did not ask me to give song requests ahead of time. If he had, Tremble would have been my number one. What an amazing song. Just the worship was incredible. Thank you guys so much for having me. If you haven't figured it out by now, you will soon. I am not from New York. I am from Texas. You will hear the accent shortly, but cut me some slack, okay? I'll do the best I can to try to tone it down so you can understand what I'm saying. No, it's really an honor and a privilege to be here. Pastor B alluded to it. It's not an accident that I'm here. We met in India in what you would call a coincidental meeting. Was not planning on meeting him. He mentioned the fact that I work for a ministry that works in India, and my wife and I were there, and the founder of our organization is named Pastor Bijou, as opposed to Pastor Bejoy. So very, very similar sounding names, right? So Pastor Bijou tells me we're going to go and connect with a Pastor Bejoy. And we're like, wow, those are very similar names. Awesome. Sounds great. So we're in Mumbai, which, I'm from Houston. Houston's a big city, right? Houston. New York's got Houston beat. New York's got Houston beat. But guess what? Mumbai's got New York beat. It's not even close. Mumbai is like taking New York City and Los Angeles and combining them. That's how big Mumbai is. It's almost 25 million people. It's a massive city. So we go to this high-rise mall in Mumbai. We go up to the third or fourth floor. We find a donut shop. And we meet Pastor Bejoy. And so, my wife is there. My wife and I, we're sitting there sort of just taking part in this conversation. Pastor Bijou talking to Pastor Bejoy, just catching up, and we're like flies on the wall. And then, we've been there probably an hour and a half. We've had our donuts, we've had our coffee. And Pastor Bijou said, well, actually, I have another meeting. I have to go. Adam and Carissa, y'all are welcome to stay. You're welcome to come with me. And at that point, I just really felt drawn to stay. So we said, we're going to stay and visit, actually. So Chris and I proceeded to stay and chat with Pastor B for probably another 2 hours. And just really, our hearts connected. We got to hear a lot of his story. This was the trip where he and Nisha were there to adopt Judah, which he mentioned. And it was just incredible to hear his story, where they come from, about the church, here, and we got to share our story, and just God connected our hearts. So when I was talking to him last week, and he was saying that he had to go to Atlanta for his aunt's funeral, and just different things going on, and said, I just feel like the Lord has putting on my heart to have you come and share. And it's an honor. It's an honor that he'd ask. It's an honor to be here with you guys this morning. And I hope you know how blessed you are to have Pastor B and Nisha as your leaders. They're incredible, incredible people. I know you know this. I'm just reminding you of it. It's just a blessing to have leaders that are the real deal. We have that at our church in Houston, and but there's a lot of churches that don't. So, man, just amazing man of God, amazing woman, and I'm so thankful that they asked me to be here today. So, we're going to go on a little journey this morning. He really wanted me to share some about the work we do in India, which I will do. He also referred to my story. I'm going to tell it. I'll try to keep it to the short or medium version, not the long version, because, wait, do we have 2 hours? No, there's a leadership meeting at 2, so I have at least until then, right? No, we'll do the short or medium version. But then I have a word that God's put on my heart recently that I feel like I'm supposed to share with you guys this morning. So for you Type A planners, that's going to be the way things are going to go. We're going to talk about India, we're going to talk about my story, and we're going to share a word, and so hold me to it, right? Hold me to it. So, a little bit about me real quick before I get into India. My name is Adam Robertson, U.S. Director of Vision Rescue. I have one wife named Carissa. This Indian joke, sorry. I have 4 daughters. I will accept all prayer that you feel like need. I need a lot. Lillian is 14. Evelyn is 12. Sylvia is 9. Got to laugh with Sister Sylvia about that earlier because my last name is Robertson and her maiden name is Robinson. So I get called Robinson a lot. So Sylvia, and then my 7-year-old is Allison. So greetings from Houston from them. But yeah, so I'm going to do this backwards. Usually I'll tell my story and how that led me into Vision Rescue, but we're going to sort of do it the opposite today. I'm going to share about Vision Rescue and the work we do. But before I share, I have a quick video that I want you to watch, if we're ready with the video.
Mumbai's got 24 million population and 300,000 street kids. For them, the daily life is, what about food today? So if they don't do this, if they don't beg, or if they don't go to work today, they won't have food to eat today.
Well, this has been the 10th year of Vision Rescue. You know, when we started with about 6 kids on a railway station platform. Didn't know what to do, didn't have a clue about what we were doing. And we started with feeding the kids, but when we understood the need was bigger than that, we went into education. You know, bus really helped us to take the school to where the kids were, take church to where the kids were. Thank God for what God has enabled us to do with the bus. But the word that God really gave me is think outside the bus. There is a lot more to be done in each community, and there's a lot more children to be reached out in each community. So we decided to have a community center and have a community worker for each community so that there is more focus, so that there is more depth into what we are able to do in each community.
Since the kids have been coming to school, the parents have been seeing the difference in the kids, and they're able to read and write. Like the parents themselves don't know how to read and write. Helping them see that, you know, if you can get your kids educated now, you can have a better tomorrow.
And this is not just giving a temporary solution. You are changing their lives. You're changing their destiny. You know, you are changing generations because of your partnership, because of your giving, because of your sacrifice. You are helping them to make wise decisions, which will change lives for generations to come.
Working with Vision Rescue has changed my life. I come from a corporate background, and I'm going to tell you a little bit more about that in a little bit. But the reality is I grew up in church, but didn't really see real poverty, didn't really ever see real need. What I love about what Vision Rescue does is, and actually Sister Sylvia alluded to this when she was praying earlier, she prayed for people in countries that can't worship freely. And India has become a country where you can't worship freely. It didn't used to be the case. I mean, India has a tremendous heritage of Christian leadership over the years and Christian ministry. I mean, Mother Teresa, her legacy in Calcutta still lives on today, and you really, if you ever visit there, you see like her footprint, not just on that city, but on that country. But the current political regime has become increasingly antagonistic towards the gospel and towards Christians, to the point where the current prime minister really has a goal to try to really make India a Hindu country completely. Very much the same way as you would think of like Saudi Arabia being a Muslim country, where to be Saudi or Iraqi or Afghani, it's not just a religious association, it's political, it's cultural, it's just your way of life, and it encompasses all facets of life. And that's what the current political party wants to do in India. They want to make Hinduism the national identity, to where to be Indian is to be Hindu. And that is religious, political, societal. It just encompasses all of life. And so they are really trying to shut down foreign influence in the country. They're trying to shut down Christian influence in the country. And I mean, ultimately, I think they'd like to shut down Muslim influence in the country, which that's difficult in certain parts of the country where there's a large Muslim population. But over just the last 4 years of this current political party, they have shut down more than half of the nonprofits that work in India, a lot of which are Christian. So I have a couple of slides that I was going to show that just talk about just really the current climate in India and just the strategic nature of India. I mean, India will soon be the largest country in the world from a population standpoint. They'll take over China just in the next, certainly in the next 10 years, maybe in the next 5 years. So it's a huge country, obviously. It's got like 20% of the world's population. It is now the 5th largest economy in the world. It just overtook the United Kingdom as the 5th largest economy in the world. So it's a large country. It's a strategic country. At the same time, next slide, it has 1/3 of the world's unreached people groups. People who have never even heard the name of Jesus. People who don't have a Bible in their own language. There are still thousands of different dialects spoken in India. It's not like China where you sort of have a unified language of Mandarin. India has a national language which is Hindi, not Hindu, the religion, but Hindi is the language. But only about 1/3 to maybe 40% of the country speaks Hindi. So, like for instance, Vision Rescue works in Mumbai, Calcutta, and Chennai. Mumbai's in the west, Calcutta's in the east, and Chennai's in the southeast. And when I go to each of those cities, they speak completely different languages. Same country, just a couple hours flight from one to the other. But in Mumbai, they speak Marathi. In Calcutta, they speak Bengali. And in Chennai, they speak Tamil. And in Mumbai, there's a lot more Hindi there because it's the financial capital of India. So there's a lot more Hindi spoken there. But in Calcutta or Chennai, very little Hindi spoken. So even like as Pastor Biju travels to different churches in different parts of the country, there are some parts of the country where he can't even speak his own language, which actually he's from South India, so he speaks a completely different natural language. It's crazy there. Like he speaks like 9 languages, and most of the people on our staff there speak at least 5 or 6 languages. It's crazy. Anyway, I'm barely handling one. So again, just from the burden of being a believer, to know that there's one country that has 1/3 of the people's unreached people groups is mind-boggling. It also has like 40% of the world's what's called sort of dire poverty. Like, and I don't remember what the exact number is, but I think it's people that live on something like in the ballpark of under $1 a day. So, next slide, please. At the same time, India only receives 6% of the world's full-time Christian workers or missionaries. As you can see from this graphic, many, many more go to Latin America, many, many more go to Africa. The reality is that Southeast Asia in total, but specifically India, are very, very hard places. And there's need in Africa. There's huge need in Africa. There's huge need in Latin America. But it's just crazy to think that a country that's this strategic is getting this little of the Christian workers. And that number is going to get even smaller because India is systematically trying to kick every missionary out of the country. So even the churches there, in addition to Vision Rescue, which our founder started in 2004 to just be the hands and feet of Jesus in large slum communities, he also operates a church network of thousands of churches in India, Southeast Asia, and the Middle East. So there's a huge church network behind the work that Vision Rescue does. But Vision Rescue was simply started to be an organization that worked alongside the church to be the hands and feet of Jesus to people that are in situations that I can't even describe them. They're so horrible. There's so much exploitation that happens on top of the poverty, so much exploitation that happens in these communities as well, just because the people don't know. And so people try to take advantage of these people. So it's a really tough situation. But what I love is that it's challenged me on how I thought about mission work, because in the past I thought, well, what does it look like to go and do this type of mission work? It looks like, well, you have a program and you know you tell people about Jesus, you share the Bible, you share stories. We work with a lot of children, so you tell them Bible stories and you teach them. But what do you do in a country where that's not allowed? What do you do in a country where you can't just open up a Bible and just share? What do you do in a country where you can't just talk about Jesus freely or openly? That's where I've had to be challenged on what ministry looks like. What does it even look like? And so what I love about what Vision Rescue does is that they do go into these communities, and we have schools, and we have nutrition programs, and healthcare programs, and job skill training. But they don't just offer those things and say, okay, we're going to do this, and then we want you to pray a prayer, or we want you to to hear a message. I mean, they're giving unconditionally. They're giving unconditional love, which is, I think, something that Jesus commanded us to all do, without any strings attached. But then what happens is, over time, is that people see the love and the care, the genuine and sincere just care for the people where they are, what they're going through. And ultimately, that causes people to ask, like, why are you doing this? Why would you come to my community day after day, week after week, month after month, year after year, and do all this stuff and not ask for anything in return? And then, when we're not in our programs, this is just the relationships, we can say, because we believe that we serve a God who sees you for who you are. He sees you, and He sees that you were made in His image, that He sees value in you. And man, when you can share Jesus through relationships like that, where there's no strings attached, but there's all this unconditional love that's come before it, and then you can share like that, I mean, once people hear it, they can't help but just want to be a part of it. They can't help but say, wow, tell me more, because my society and my religion tells me I'm worthless. My society, my religion even tells me that because I live this way, because I'm in this slum, I've done something to earn this place in which I live, and the only way that I can work out of this is by dying and coming back in something else, and dying and coming back as something else. It's called reincarnation. Over and over again until I work off this karma. And so even the society is set up to where, like, if you're rich, if you're wealthy, then you don't touch or get near those people because that karma could rub off on you. So they're used to their own society and their own people saying, you're untouchable, you're unlovable, you're worthless. And so what kind of power is it when people come and say, no, you have value, you're worth something because my God tells me you're worth something, you have value. It's changed my life. And the work that we're doing is incredible. I'll be hanging around for a while afterwards. If you guys want to know more about what we do, happy to tell you a lot more. But I want to share a little bit about my story and how I even came to be at a place where I'm working with this organization. I'm from Houston, so this won't surprise you. I'm an oil and gas guy. I worked in petroleum. Actually, my old company was headquartered in Manhattan. I don't know if any of you are familiar with Hess Corporation. You know, green and white, used to be gas stations everywhere. They used to sell toy trucks near Christmas time. That was my company. I worked for them for a long time. To the point where, because I mentioned I grew up in church, my wife and I have been married for 21 years. 21 of the best years of my life. And amazing. She's an amazing woman. I'm blessed to have her. I wish she was here this morning. I grew up in a small town in northeast Texas, about an hour and a half east of Dallas. We moved to Houston in 2003. And over time, after moving to Houston, kind of going from the small town to the big town, and working for my company, I let career start to sort of become my idol, my God, my religion. I wouldn't have told you that. I still went to church every Sunday. I still showed up at the Baptist Church in Houston, Texas, every Sunday, checked that church box, but my life, my private life, I couldn't have been further from God. And this doesn't happen overnight. For any of you who have been through a season like this, you don't just wake up one day and say, you know what, today I think I'm going to stop following the Lord. It doesn't happen that way. You make little decisions that along the way, over time, they accumulate to the point where you realize one day you wake up and realize, I don't really know the Lord. I might have like an intellectual belief in Him, but I don't really know Him. And when you get to a place in life where things get hard, not having that connection, well, it's everything, right? I mean, we can build our lives on the foundation of money and of career and of sports, of even our kids sometimes. We can build our life on all these other things, but when that foundation is ripped away, when that foundation's crumbled, well, Jesus talks about the house that's built on the rock versus the house that's built on the sand. And I don't think the house that's built on the sand fared very well when the storm came. And that's how it was for me. That's how it was for me. I went through years of just slowly seeing my career on an upward trajectory and not really realizing or thinking about the fact that my faith was on the exact opposite trajectory. So really, from the world's perspective, everything was working and going really, really well. But this has been about 5 years ago. I remember sitting in my house, and my wife and my girls were getting ready to go to church on a Sunday morning. I remember just sitting there, and my thought literally was, I wish I didn't have to go to church today because I have too much work to do. And it was a moment where I realized that I had thought it. Like, I'd been probably thinking it for years, but it was the first time that it's almost like that thought, I could hold it in my hand and see, like, I thought that, and I meant it. I thought it, and I meant it. Like, if I could choose it, I would not go to church today with my family because I have work to do. And the reality is I've been working so much and not spending time with my wife, not spending time with my kids. I mean, it had been happening for years, but that was the first moment where I realized it. And, that's what God has to do with us, I mean, I'm an idiot. I need clear direction. And I was at a place where I realized, like, I was slowly just going straight to hell. And I was happy about it. That's the thing. I would have told you, like, I loved what I did. Despite the fact that I wasn't praying or spending time in the Word, I loved it. I loved it. I would have parted from it. But that was the moment I realized He was starting to work in my heart. So that was 2014, and that was kind of a crazy year because what happened was there were several things that God started doing all at the same time, and I'll try to make sense of this, but there's like really 3 things that He started doing in my life that all converged. One was He brought about a situation where my wife and I were asked to lead a marriage study in our church, which was the last thing in the world I needed to be doing, was to help lead a marriage study in our church. But my wife had been praying, and she knew that I needed to be in a marriage study, so she said yes before I could say, no, I think we're busy. So we get in this situation where we're starting to lead or facilitate this marriage study at our church. And that started leading some conversations, which I'll get to in a minute. Second thing that happened is I was asked to go on a short-term missions trip to drill a water well in Nicaragua. I had never been on a missions trip. I said yes, and here's the reason why. I'm going to be totally honest. This is a safe place, right? I'm going to be totally honest. I went on that trip because my thought was, I work for an oil company. I've never seen a well drill. I need to go see what drilling a well looks like. Even though it's a water well, I need to go see what drilling a well looks like. I was not thinking I need to go and share the name of Jesus. I was thinking I need to go see a well drill. God can still redeem it though, right? And He did. So that happened. And then thirdly, I was starting to have some mild vision issues. Not a big deal, just was starting to have some vision issues. One of my eyes would kind of get blurry, and then it would come back, get blurry, and come back. So I was starting to see the eye doctor about that. Now, none of those things seem to make any sense together, but I'm going to bring it together. What happened was in November of 2014, over the course of this marriage study and some other things, God had me reading His Word again. I was back in the Word because I had to be, right? I mean, we're leading this study. I mean, I'm facilitating. I'm asking questions about biblical marriage and what it looks like. I mean, I've got to at least read the study, right? I'm that responsible, even though my heart wasn't in it initially. And so God has started drawing me back just through that and through the conversations that my wife and I had to have in order to prepare for these lessons. At the same time, I went on this trip to Nicaragua, and God broke my heart through that trip because, again, it was my first time to encounter what poverty looks like in another part of the world. And there is dire poverty here in the United States. Don't get me wrong. There's severe physical poverty and spiritual poverty. But I tell you what, it really looks different. The things that even the poor here have, you would be considered wealthy in other parts of the world, but like running water. Having running water puts you in the top, I don't know what percent of the world's rich, because there are literally huge parts of the world, huge number of people that don't even have running water. So seeing that was it was a life-changing experience. And then these eye issues. So I'm going to my eye doctor, and my eye doctor is a friend. He's like, your eye's fine, bro. Don't worry about it. I'm like, something's not right. And he's like, okay, fine. I'll get you to this other doctor, and they'll do a scan, and they'll look at your optic nerve just to make sure there's nothing going on there. So, okay, great. So did that, and they didn't see anything wrong. So they did another scan just to like take more of a head scan. And so that revealed some other things that were going on, which I didn't know about. In November, my wife and I feel like we reconciled. I reconciled with God, most importantly. I remember a conversation where my wife and I, it was just the end of this marriage study, and we had to have a conversation about forgiveness. And it was one of those where we started at like 8 o'clock at night after my girls had gone to bed, and we were still talking at like 2 or 3 in the morning. And God just really broke my heart. I started confessing things to her that I had done or I had thought, and just how far I was from the Lord. And God just redeemed me at that point, but then my wife and I were reconciled. And I think this mission trip and just going, He used that to just help soften my heart. But then what happened is that really about the next week, because that was end of November, right before Thanksgiving, the first week of December, I went in to get the results of the scan that had been done on my head to look at my optic nerve, and the doctor said that they had found a large brain tumor. And that he was not a specialist in this area. They needed to get me to another doctor to look at it. And so I said, great. So they got me into another doctor. And that doctor on December 3rd, 2014, told me it was the largest mass of this type he'd ever seen. It was in the base of my brain. And that it was acting as a plug. You know, your brain makes fluid, and that fluid escapes down your spinal column. And so this tumor was basically plugging that hole so that no fluid could escape. So fluid was just building up in my brain, and so they said, we have to go and take this tumor out like immediately, or you're going to have an aneurysm and die if your head doesn't explode first. So it's kind of like having a big head, but this was not like a joking matter. I was getting a big head because it was filling up with fluid. But the problem is when we go and remove this tumor, which we have to do or you'll have a stroke, when we do this, the tumor is situated in a place where it's wrapped around the muscle that controls all your memory. So when we cut this thing out, you'll lose all of your memory, some of your memory. We can't really tell you, but it is what it is. And you're going to have the surgery in 2 weeks, because if are you having headaches? Well, yeah, I have headaches. It's probably stress. No. That's not stress. That's the pressure on your head from all this fluid. We have to go in and take this thing out right away. So teach your wife how to do all the finances. Teach her how to basically run your family. You probably won't be able to go back to your job. Spend time with your kids. This was right before Christmas, obviously, so we'll get you in right before Christmas and do this all-day surgery and take this thing out. And we'll just, he wasn't a believer, but it's more like, just hope for the best. But it's not a good outlook. And all I can say is that really the miracle of the story is the fact that God had been doing all these things leading up to that to draw me back. So at the place where I heard the doctor give this diagnosis, which was like the last thing in the world that I expected to hear or wanted to hear, I just felt this peace and this almost joy. It was really the first time I'd really encountered the Holy Spirit in a powerful way, because This doctor's sitting here telling me, you might not remember anything. You might not remember your family. You probably won't go back to your job. And I told you how important my job to me was at that point. And I just was like, I was just smiling. I couldn't help it. I was like, I have this peace. I couldn't explain it. And it was just a miracle because he had been drawing me back. If I had heard that diagnosis 2 months before, I probably would have been a basket case. I probably would have run out of there crying and screaming like, you can't do this to me. But it wouldn't have even been probably as much of a heartache over losing my family as it was my career. I was that addicted to it. But the story didn't know. I went in for an all-day surgery on December 22nd, and they put my head in a vise, screwed into my skull in 16 different places, as you can see from the awesome scar I have on my head, which I tell people that was from a knife fight. But they look at me and they're like, no, bro, we know better. They took a big piece of my skull out. They went into my brain to start trying to remove this tumor. And this is what my doctor told my wife right after the surgery, like an all-day surgery. He said, we went in to go start cutting on this tumor to remove it. He said it just unentangled and just let go of his brain. It just untangled and just let go, and it was just floating there. And we just started cutting it up and taking it out, but we didn't have to cut on his brain at all. So, praise to the Lord, because my wife said, oh, that's a miracle. And he said, well, I don't believe in miracles, but it was a miracle. Yeah. And I was supposed to be in the hospital for 3 weeks while they did follow-ups and tests and checked swelling and bleeding, and just to see like what all I'd lost. I did like a 12-hour baseline psych evaluation right before the surgery, so I could go back after the fact and see like, what has this dude lost? Everything from memory to motor skills to vision, peripheral vision, all of it. And they ended up canceling the follow-up because they were like, you're fine. But I went home on Christmas Eve, 2 days later. So it was just an absolute miracle. And everything changed after that. Through a miracle of bureaucracy, my insurance company, HR department, and doctor's office could not get on the same page about my release date. Back to my work release, going back to work, I got to be home for 2 months. And I just spent it in the Word. I just spent it in the Word and just spending time just trying to just grow that closeness back to the Lord. And I'll be honest, it was really the first time in my life I had. I don't know, and this is for some of you young people, I realized growing up, I'd grown up in church, but my faith that I supposedly had was my parents' faith. I had never had to own my own faith. I'd never had to own my own faith. And young people, I'll just say, like, own your own faith. Like, at some point, you'll be out there and it'll just be you and God. You won't have your parents anymore. And when troubles come, your parents' faith, it's not going to matter. It's going to be between you and the Lord. And I realized that as a late 30s person, as opposed to, I wish I'd learned that much younger. And just real shortly, that again, God just changed things for me after that. But 4 months after that, my wife was at an event with some women from our church, and my youngest daughter, who was at the time 2, fell in a swimming pool, and no one saw it. And she was not discovered until she was floating in the pool and was black and purple all over. And we don't really know how long she was under. She was found by my oldest daughter and a friend. But they did CPR on her for 7-10 minutes. Nothing happened. I had some friends that were there that were just praying for Jesus just to come and save her. And at this point, we weren't even doing CPR on her. We were just waiting for the ambulance to come. And just in the process of cradling her and holding her, she just started coughing. Now, we got in the ambulance and went to the hospital. This was 6 o'clock at night on a Saturday night. She would not make eye contact. She wasn't talking. It was just nothing. I mean, it's just she wasn't there. So I'm worried about brain damage. The doctor's like, she has so much fluid in her lungs, more than likely for being under the pool however long. We need to get that out first. We have to wait 12 hours though to do an x-ray on her. She's just 2. We don't want a radiator, so we're going to let y'all get into a room, and then we'll test her in the morning. So my wife had put out a note to a bunch of friends like, pray, pray, please pray. We didn't get into a private room until 4 in the morning. The test was at 6, so we didn't sleep. Allison still at that point just wasn't even making eye contact. She was just looking off and just still discolored, wasn't talking. She slept for maybe an hour. At 6 o'clock they came in to say it's time to go do the test. And she popped up and said, "Hi Daddy, hi Mommy." And they went and did the test. She had no fluid in her lungs. And then she had no brain damage. I mean, this all happened in a period of 4 months. So you can imagine at this point, I'm like, God, whatever you want, I am listening. Whatever it is, just stop it, please. Like, I can't handle anymore. And that's what led to Vision Rescue, guys. It started as this prayer of just, I don't know what you want. I know you've saved me for a reason. Then it became, you've saved my family for a reason. And that's what led to meeting Pastor Bijou and then being asked to be a part of the Vision Rescue team. So I want to tell you my story because really the word that I have for you guys, just sort of an application point as we sort of wrap up today, is just thinking about, I've had the word remember on my heart for several months now. Just remembrance. And it's very appropriate that we took communion today because, I mean, that's what Jesus called us to do, is to remember. And I mean, think about it. It's not just Jesus telling us to remember his sacrifice, remember his death through taking of communion, but remembrance is throughout the whole Bible. I mean, God remembered. He remembered his covenants to his people. He remembered the cry of the Israelites in the wilderness. It said he remembered them. If you look at the Old Testament, really the story of the Israelites, I mean, that's what Passover was created for. It was created so that the people would remember their bondage. They would remember their slavery. They would remember what God had done. Deuteronomy 6:12 says, "Be careful not to forget the Lord who brought you up out of Egypt." God knows us. He knows that I'm forgetful. He knows that we're all forgetful. And in this culture, we're so easily distracted. It's so easy to forget. And just to be distracted just by the cares of life, the trials of life for sure, but I can be distracted just in the everyday. Throughout Scripture, he calls us to remember his provision, his promises, his name, his person, who he is, his signs, his miracles, his laws, his commands. And most importantly, this hits home for me, he calls us to remember our state of who we are without him. Before we knew him, he wants us to remember. He's so sovereign. But he wants us to remember. He knows we're forgetful and he wants us to remember. So my charge to us would be to remember. And for all that I just told you, my story, my testimony, like you would think, how could Adam forget that stuff? That's pretty miraculous stuff, right? Well, guess what? Adam forgets. There's a lot of days where I get up and I go about my day and some, I don't know what happens, but I just get into this place of grumbling and just being dissatisfied or being discouraged. And I need to remember, right? I need to remember what God's done. But we all do. We all need to remember.
Amen.
Pruning is not easy. Jesus talked about the fact that every branch there's branches every branch that bears no fruit. He cuts off every branch that bears no fruit, while every branch that does bear fruit, he prunes, so that it'll be even more fruitful. Pruning doesn't feel good. Ask a tree, ask a bush, ask a vine. You take this large metal choppy thing, and you take a branch and you cut it off. It doesn't feel good to the plant, right? But it's necessary because then there's more growth, and it's the same with us. Some of us need to be pruned. I needed to be pruned of a lot of things. And those big branches that God had to lop off, it did not feel good. But then what happens is that the more you prune a bush or a tree, the more growth there is. And then, those little branches start to grow out again, and it's much easier to snip those, right? They're just little. And so they can be snipped. And I think that it's like that with us. We just need to get into a place where that pruning process becomes easier, that we allow it to become easier so that there's not new sin and new things that come up in our life. I mean, I know that some of you guys have probably been through really hard things, maybe even worse things than I've been through. And I would just back to what I said earlier, just a reminder of our foundation needs to be the Lord. But we need to be that vine that we allow Him to prune us and just to snip those things away so that new sin doesn't come up back in our life. I mean, that's something even now I have to remind myself, like, it's real easy for me to be goal-focused and career-focused. I just have to occasionally surrender that to Him, even though I'm in ministry now, and just say, look, God, I can still make this about me. I can still make this about me and not about you, so just snip those things. Cut them away. Second thing, remember, but then set memorials. Set memorials in your life to remind you of the things God has done. I mean, again, because we're forgetful and easily distracted, I mean, it's good for me to have clear pictures and reminders of what God's done. I have a picture of my tumor in my house. It's in my kitchen. It's on the refrigerator. It's just a reminder of, like, when I see it, it's like, oh yeah, I remember. I have a picture of my daughter shortly after she was back from the hospital. It's just a reminder of all that God has done. And I would encourage you guys to do the same thing. Moses built a memorial at the foot of Mount Sinai to remember God's covenant. God commanded Joshua to build a memorial of remembrance after the Israelites crossed the Jordan. Do you remember that? And it was for them to remember, but also for them to tell their children and to be a witness to a lost world. Isn't that awesome? That memorial was to do all of those things. It was for them to remember, but for them to tell their children, disciple their children, and tell them what God has done. But then it was a witness to a lost world. And that leads into number 3, guys. Tell your story. Your story is so powerful. And guess what? We all have one. We all have a story. And your story is the most powerful way that we can witness to a lost world. Amen. Your story has power. Your story doesn't have to involve a brain tumor or a near drowning. Your story probably has crazier things in it than mine does. And that's powerful because God's going to put people in your life for you to use your story to minister to. I've seen it over and over again. And I think even as we try to share our faith and be a witness, it's very tempting to sometimes not do that because it's like we're not going to have the right answers. We're not going to know the right things to say. I don't know the Bible well enough. Guys, Jesus does not need a defense attorney. Amen. Jesus can defend himself. Right. He doesn't need you to be his attorney and defend him. But you know what he does need you to do? He needs you to be a witness to your story and the power of what he's done in your life. Amen. I think one of the most powerful stories in the Bible is the blind man that Jesus heals. And you know, he heals him on a Sabbath, and the Pharisees get mad like they always do, and they question him, and then they pull his parents in, they question them, and they're like, he's old enough to talk for himself. I'm scared of what you're going to do to me. So they bring the guy back in, and what does he say? He says, guys, I don't even know. I didn't even see him. I couldn't see. Here's what I know. I was blind. Yes. And now I can see, and that's what the world needs, is people who are willing to say, guys, I don't have all the answers. There's a lot of problems in the world. People are going to throw a lot of stuff at you if you say you're a Christian. Well, you know, what about this? And what about this? And why didn't your God do something about this? And why is there evil in the world? And yet, don't worry about having all the right theological answers. Be someone who's just willing to say, I don't know. I don't have all the answers. I don't know. Here's what I know. I was blind. Yes. And now I can see. Yes. Right? So I just want to, as we close, I just want to just take just a couple minutes, and I just want us to be quiet before the Lord. And what I want us to do is I want us to stop and I want us to remember. Just take a couple minutes just to be in the silence of the moment and just remember all that God has done in your life. And it could be something big. It could be something massive. It could be something small. But guess what? Nothing is small to God. Any little thing he's done in your heart, any little thing, it's not little because he did it in your heart. It's not little. It's all big. So just remember those things. And then do me a favor. Set up a memorial somewhere. Somewhere where you can see it. On your desk, in your house, on your refrigerator. Put up a memorial just to remind yourself of what God has done. and then practice telling your story. Practice. It takes practice. This is not the first time that I've told my story, and I'm still not very good at it. I'm still working on it. But you can't tell your story if you don't practice telling your story, if you don't think about it. So that's what I want us to leave us with. So let me close, not close, I'm just going to say a prayer, and then I just want to have those moments of quiet. And again, maybe you're sitting there and you're like, I don't really know this Jesus that you're talking about. Maybe that's you. And if that is you, and just be in the moment and just think about maybe those things in your life that maybe don't make sense, like, man, this almost happened in my life once, but things turned out okay, or I was in a bad spot, but strangely things worked out, or maybe you are still in a hard spot, but the thing is that Jesus is right there with you. So let's just take a few moments to be quiet and think, and then someone's going to come up and close us in prayer. And I thank you guys for just letting me be here today to share. And I appreciate you guys, and I love you guys, and I'm thankful for the stories that He's working out in all of your lives.